All right, everybody. How's it going? I am back for episode number 2 here. Again, like I said on the last one, bear with me. Made a few tweaks. Hopefully, this one goes a little bit smoother and my mic is on right now. Maybe you guys can give me a thumbs up if it is. I had a lot of great feedback last week. I appreciate everybody tuning in and reaching out after the fact and all the comments. It's awesome seeing that feedback, and it gives me some kind of positive reinforcement that you guys care what's going on here. So all great stuff. So let's dig in. I tried to adjust the stream, so I don't think there's as much of a delay with the chat. Can somebody test that for me really quickly and just right now, somebody do a test 1, 2 in the chat just so I can see how quickly it pops up. Okay. All right. Well, my chat here is not updating. Hang on 1 second, guys. Let me check something here. See, that's why we're doing this. See, my chat's testing 1, 2. Give me one more. Somebody else put something in there for me. Do a test 3, 4. Awesome. Love it. Thanks, guys. Appreciate that. Okay, so I say let's just dig in. Let's start off really quickly. The last video, I know some of you guys went back and rewatched, and I got a variety of feedback. Some people saying it was too basic, and some people saying it was like I skipped through stuff too fast, and a lot of people got lost on a few things. This is a work in progress for me, so I totally get that it might not be killing it right out of the gate here. But I'm curious, does anybody have any questions they want me to address regarding kind of where we left off on the last one before I get going? Let me pull up my main screen here. So basically, this is kind of where we left off on the last one. Basically, we made our template tracks. I showed you how to set up all your auxiliary sends, your auxiliary returns, how I do my mix bus and my master section. And the next step moving forward is now starting to really take some of these principles and really build in a mix template where when you're getting tracks from somebody else or you're taking a production that you've done, that you can use a template to start slotting stuff into. And there's going to be a little, I don't want to say more advanced stuff, but I'm probably, I don't want to skip over stuff too fast. So doesn't look like there's any questions. So let's dig in here. So this is obviously where we left off, and this is very basic. Let me actually get rid of these drum tracks here because we don't need those. Let's get rid of those. Done. Gone. So the other thing I tried to do today, hopefully this works, I tried to change my screen resolution a little bit here for you so everything's not so tiny. Hopefully that's working well for you. Anyways, so we've got our 2 template tracks here, and then we've got our effect sends and our master section here. There's a bunch of other amazing routing techniques that I use that make things really easy. The first thing that I like to do is, again, kind of left over from my days on the SSL, is I build out all of my sessions. I have 8 kind of food groups. I've got drums, percussion, bass, what I call guitars A, guitars B. So it's 2 separate groups of guitars, and I'll explain a little bit how those can be broken up. Keyboards, lead vocals, background vocals. Everything fits into those groups, and you can have as many groups as you want, but it's like, again, my scar tissue from the SSL days was in the middle of the SSL, there were 8 VCA faders, and those 8 faders were, they were VCAs or motorized, whatever you wanted. But anyways, they basically corresponded with groups. So you could set each fader to a group 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. But you only had 8 groups on the SSL. So I try to restrict myself to those 8 groups. And it just obviously makes things a little bit easier as well in terms of, I have obviously grouping for all of those. I have subgroup auxiliary faders, or auxiliary inputs for those. I've got VCA faders for those. Like there's a lot of things that if you start getting like 13, 14, 15 groups, like I know some people have groups for, drum shells, drum, brass, drum samples. Then they'll have percussion, sound effect. Like I know some people have like 14 groups. We'll call them like the big major food groups. And ultimately, with what I'm going to show you how I work, that would get just too crazy with too much stuff going on. So if you see me looking over here every once in a while, I'm just checking my chat. For some reason, my chat on my my screen here isn't updating the way it should. But anyways, here we go. So I think maybe the best thing for me to do would be actually to open up my mix template. I'm just gonna go straight to my mix template. I think I opened this up on the last session. Yeah, let's do that. Let's close this down and open up the other one. All right, mix template. Everybody have a good couple weeks. I couldn't do a live stream last week. I was in the studio working, so wasn't able to do one. That's just kind of what happens. Okay, check out this disaster of looking of a thing. It looks like a disaster now, but it's actually pretty basic. So I'm going to walk through this, and then we'll do a round of questions before I kind of dig in. But I'm going to do a quick overview right now. Okay. So remember I said I like to use a lot of symbols in my track names, and you can see here, instead of just doing the bullet, I actually went online to whatever website I just did, like, character symbols. And I found a little circle, and then I found like two little circles, kind of like it's not the infinity sign, but it's kind of like two little circles overlapping. So that's my mono, and that's my stereo. And basically what I did was those template tracks that I showed you guys what to do with, how to build those, I used those to then build out a track for every group that I'm going to have in my session. And everything needs to go within one of those food groups, like I was talking about. So the reason why I do this is because I want to set up all my grouping, and I want to set up my VCA faders, and I want to set up all of my routing ahead of time. And if you just make a template track and don't actually make a template track for drums and a template track for bass and a template track for all of your different groups, well, then you're adding in those steps of having to regroup everything every time, and then having to potentially set your VCA fader for your group. And again, I know I'm blowing through stuff fast here, but bear with me. So what I've done here is within my drums, I also break things up within my drums. So as most of you know, the kind of music that I do, it's a lot of like heavy rock. It's a lot of very dense, not metal, but like it's rock. It's hard rock, active rock, whatever you want to call it. And ultimately, even country these days has a lot of samples. But what I was getting to was there's usually so many layers of kicks and snares these days that my way of kind of keeping that straight is by using a folder track, which is basically on an auxiliary return that kind of gives you some visual benefits and organizational benefits as well. But this here, I mean, any one of these orange tracks here, those are folder tracks. Basically, what those let you do is if you have a chunk of tracks, just audio tracks or MIDI tracks or whatever you want, you can dump those in to a folder track and then collapse or open the folder. So when I'll show you, nothing's in folders right now, and there's a reason for that too. Okay, so here we go. What was I saying? Kicks and snares. Yes. It's not uncommon for me to get sessions from other people that have 10 kick tracks, and they want to give me every sample that they have in their library and let me figure out which one to use. And I mean, I don't necessarily I like people making decisions, like I talked about on our last episode. Like, if you're a producer, make some decisions. That's your job. Your job is to make some creative decisions to steer the creative vision of the track. So pick a kick drum sample that you like, or 3 and blend it, or whatever you want to do, but give the mixer some direction, just the way that when I'm producing a track, I don't at the very end layer in 14 kick samples and audition them. I'm building what kick sound I want as I go. And if you're a producer sending stuff off to other people to mix, or you're just doing it for yourself, make those decisions early. You can always build in some room to change it, but make those decisions early. So how I've found best to just organize the way that I work and to keep things as least overwhelming as possible is to just kind of start consolidating stuff down as much as possible. So if I'm dealing with, let's say, 4 or 5 kick tracks, maybe I've got a couple live kick mics, an in and out, and then maybe 3 kick samples, and maybe there's an ambient sample as well or something like that. What I like to do is have all those tracks separate. That's fine. And here I'll just use the toms because it's right in the middle of the screen for you guys. But imagine there were another 3 tracks in here, and actually I'll just do that so we can look at it. So, and again, remember, we don't use create tracks anymore, do we? We do use duplicate, right? So we'll call this tom samp 1, tom samp 2, tom samp 3, or T samp, right? Okay, cool. So now imagine I had this tom had 3 samples. So it's not 4 separate toms. Sorry, I'm using a bad example here, but it's in the middle of the screen. So there you go. Let's say it was all the same tom, like the high tom, but there were 3 samples layered in. It's kind of a pain in the ass to deal with that, having to constantly be either when you want to adjust a level, you've got to adjust the level of all of them, and then you have to go in and make groups for all of them and all that shit. It just makes things a little bit of a pain in the ass. So what I like to do is take all of these tracks that are the same instrument, let's say kick or snare, and just dump them into a folder track, a routing folder track, so that way the signal is being routed through this track here, and then get a balance that I like between the 5 or 6 samples, let's say, and then I'll collapse the folder. Let me just do this. I'll show you. So I'm going to dump all of those into the folder, and then I'm just going to collapse that folder. And now all of those tracks are feeding into this one auxiliary, and now I just treat this as if like that's my overall, it says toms, but we'll pretend it's kick. Like, let's say my kick, okay? And then what I'll do is I'll process it as if it was one thing. And again, we're building and we're kind of like breaking things down into steps. So instead of having to worry about 5 tracks of kick samples, I'm going to just actually take this out so I don't mess us up here. Sorry for using toms. I probably just picked the absolute worst example. Snares. Let's go snares. Instead of having to worry about 5 tracks of snare drums, samples, mics, whatever, you consolidate that into one routing track, and now you have one fader. If somebody says, I want the snare up, as long as you have the blend the way you want it, now you turn the snare up. If somebody says, hey, can we get a little more attack on the snare, you can do one of 2 things. You can either change some processing on your folder track here, your snare track, or you can open it up and maybe you turn up the snare that's got a little bit more attack. But it basically, by the time we are done building our mix template and assigning all of the tracks, I'm left with kick, snare, toms, cymbals, room. So instead of having, let's say, a multi-tracked drum kit with 24 mics, and then you've got 6 tracks of samples, you got 30 tracks of drums, I boil it down to 6. So I'm only really looking at 6. And the only reason I'm going to bust into those folder tracks is to kind of fine tune things. But ultimately, once you get your balance the way you want within the snares, then you can collapse that folder and just start working. And it just keeps things so simple. So we are going to actually do that, and I'll kind of show you the process a little bit. But then once you have all of those tracks, you know what? Let's just do this real quick. We're going to go dump all these into the folders, and we're going to start collapsing folders. Okay, here we go. Okay, so I'm just literally grabbing. There's a reason I don't do this. There's a step when I'm actually importing somebody else's tracks. I bring them into the session and I put them all in the folder together. There's a reason why I do that. We can get to that later, but that's why these aren't already in the folder tracks. It makes having them already in the folder track actually kind of convolutes things a little bit. But anyways, let's just dump them into the folder tracks here. I think I saw a couple questions pop up, so just bear with me, because I want you guys to see how I can clean up this session really quickly. All right, so I'm going to collapse these down. Let's go to this page here. So now, don't worry about these inactive tracks. Those are parallel lines for parallel compression, parallel processing, whatever you want to call it. I don't always use them, but they're always set up. I just have them inactive. They're always routed. I don't know if you guys saw let me just open one of these tracks here. Let's say the cymbals here. So on my cymbal template tracks, I've already got my cymbal, what I call Sims comp send, which goes to this, already set up. And remember, I said I like using, pardon the pun, cymbals. If you can see the track names, I hope you can. I've got instead of just using a dash, I think I used dashes on the last session, or maybe we didn't even get to this on the last one, but I've got two arrows, one above each other, pointing to the right. Again, I went on Google, found a website that had a bunch of like keyboard symbols, and I found symbols that I wanted to see, and that also looked good on my control surface. Oh, by the way, somebody remind me, I took a picture of kind of my workstation here. We'll have a look at that. Somebody asked me kind of what my control surface situation here is. It looks a little bit like a NASA spaceship, but I'll show a picture of that in a second. But so for any sort of like busing, where I've got like a subgroup, where I've got a bunch of tracks going into a subgroup, I like to use lines in front of the name. So for these kind of drum subs, I've got arrows. And then for the big food group sums, I've got just kind of horizontal lines. And then anything that's quote unquote parallel processing. So you can see next to my drums here, I've got another one called drums, but these are horizontal and those are vertical. For me, horizontal is kind of like the main, is the bus, and vertical is like the parallel line. When I say parallel line, parallel signal. And so in my drums, you'll see percussion. I've got one here for percussion. It's inactive. I've got one. All of my food groups have parallel lines already set up. But then I also have parallel lines in my drums already set up as well. And again, I don't always use them. If I'm not going to use them, I'll hide them. I'll leave them in the session. I'll just hide them. But they're always there. If at any point in a mix, I wanted to run a parallel, let's say a parallel kick chain, I don't have to create that. I don't have to import it. All I do is grab the track, turn it on, and it's active. It's 3 button presses. So really quickly here, I'm going to jump to the chat. Give me a second. Do you import the audio tracks people send you to the clip list? That way you can drag them? No, absolutely not. And I'll tell you why. Most people who send me stuff send me sessions, Pro Tool sessions, and most people don't consolidate their tracks. It's like kind of how they left it. I'm going to do probably maybe even my next episode, I'm going to do like a mix, like a prep. I'm going to take a session and show you guys how I would like it prepped and how I think a lot of other mixers would like it prepped. I had a very proud moment. I've got to find the clip. I'll post the clip on socials. Chris Lord-Alge's done a bunch of mixes for stuff that I've produced in the past. Songs that I either am struggling with the mix and it's just not working, or if we want that sound, or even if I'm just burnt out on the song, I'll often have other mixers mix productions. And I was watching, actually somebody sent me this. I wasn't watching it. Somebody sent me this. I think Chris Lord-Alge was doing, I think he was doing like a Mix with the Masters Q&A, kind of like this. And somebody asked him about Nickelback, and it's interesting because he kind of name dropped me a little bit. Name dropped. Let me rephrase that. He didn't name drop me. I'm not a name. He's in a name drop. He gave me props. Let's say that. He called me out specifically for. He's like, man, when Chris's sessions, Chris, send them to him. He's like, everything's awesome. He's like, he's done a lot of, like, it just shows up clean. He can get to work. I've made a lot of decisions. And so there's a system and there's a process that I go through to get it to that point. And if a guy like Chris Lord-Alge is saying that my sessions showing up to him are basically perfect, ready to go for him, I mean, there's not much of a bigger compliment or a higher bar for that. So I'm going to show you what I do. You don't have to do it exactly the same, but I'm going to also tell you why I do it, and then you can start prepping your sessions that way, and also having your clients tell them how you want your stuff prepped. But anyways, I find very few mix sessions I get, people are giving me like consolidated tracks that all start at 0 and that whole thing. Like that doesn't really happen a lot anymore. So what I do is I'll do one of two things. Depending on how dense their session is, if they've got a lot of plugins and automation and edits and that kind of stuff, I might start with their session and bring my template into it. And then there's other scenarios where I will start with this, sorry, bump the mic. I will start with this session and then bring their tracks into it. But I'll usually do that by using this function. And it's amazing how many people still don't know this function exists. Let me just pick a track here. Let's go to the desktop here. Okay, so go live stream. All right, so if you select a session, so let's say somebody sent me a Pro Tools session. If you go to import session data, and pick that session, this window will pop up and it will show you all of the tracks that are in the session that you were sent. Okay, and what you can do is you can select tracks to bring into your session. Okay, if you want to bring them all, you can, option click them all. But here's the other cool thing that, again, it's amazing how many people who have been using Pro Tools for years don't even know this. You can choose which parts of those tracks you want to bring in. So if you hit this choose button, oh, sorry guys, thank you. Boom, boom, boom. Here we go. Let me back up. Sorry guys. Okay. All right. Hopefully, I'll just start over on this session import. Okay, session import data here. Okay, import file, import session data. Okay, so we're gonna pick a session. Let's say that was the session somebody sent me to mix. I'm going to be able to see all of the tracks that are in that session and pick which ones I want to bring into my session. So you might not want all their tracks. So let's say they gave you a bunch of guitar DIs, but they already committed their amp sims and you like them. You don't need to bring those in. You can skip over those, or you can just select everything depending on what the session looks like. But here's the part that not a lot of people know about, and it's the track data import. Okay, so if you click the choose button, it brings up this menu here that gives you all of these different parameters that you can check or uncheck to decide what you want to bring into your session. So for instance, let's say you're bringing in a session, they've got just a ton of plugins loaded up, but you don't want any of that stuff. You just want their audio. You want the tracks, the audio, and that's it. You can basically unselect everything and then just pick clips and media, and maybe you want the clip gain, and maybe you also want clip effects, maybe you want alternate playlists, and then maybe you also want, let's say, track colors, and maybe they've made groups and you want their mix and edit groups. Like, you can pick that but leave out all the other stuff. Vice versa, when let's say I'm doing a mix and I send out a mix tonight and the artist takes a day to get back to me with their comments, and I make a couple changes in the meantime. And by the time I send them the second mix with all the changes, they just listen to the first mix, and then when they decide there's a bunch of things in the first mix that they like better, I can go to those tracks and just bring in, let's say, the plugin settings. So let's say I EQ'd a vocal differently, and they're like, oh no, I like what you had like couple sessions ago or a couple mixes ago. I can go find that track and just bring in the plugin settings. And then what you do is you actually use a function in here called match tracks. So what you can do is, let's say here, I've got an effect stereo 1. Let's say that's got a setting on it I want to bring into this session. I can match that to my effect stereo 1 here. So that's the one from the source session that somebody gave me. And the destination is, let's say, my mix template. Okay. And then I can pick what I want. Let's say I just want the plugin assignments. And I'll probably take the plugin setting if I want the plugin. And then you can hit OK. And then you hit OK here. And it leaves everything else on the track alone. It just brings in the plugins. Super, super powerful. So if you don't know this menu, like, this is something, pull out the manual, find another YouTube video. There's lots of really good, like, kind of like Pro Tools basic stuff online. Import session data menu or window. Type that into Google or YouTube and see what you get. But you guys should know this this import function, know this inside and out. There's also like overall session data that you can bring in. So let's say somebody's imported, let's say somebody's already set up their tempo and they've got key signatures and a chord map and track markers and all of that stuff. You can bring that in without actually bringing in any tracks. So let me go back to the chat here. Did that answer the question about bringing in tracks? Let me just read the question again. Drag them onto the tracks that you have already created and loaded with your inserts and sends. So, okay, I'll kind of get back to that. But like I said, I typically, what I'll do is, if somebody just sent me audio, I'll import their audio into my session. I'll just bring it onto new tracks. So let me show you how to do that really quickly as well. So let's say somebody was using Logic. And so they actually sent me audio tracks that are all start and end at the same time. What I would do in that scenario is import audio, and I would go and grab all of those tracks and copy them. Here's another big, we're getting into Pro Tools basics, but this is stuff that could potentially save you tons and tons of heartache and headache. Always use copy, okay? If you see down here where it's kind of, oh, sorry guys. I gotta get a better way of doing this. Sorry guys. Okay. If somebody sends me tracks from, let's say they consolidated tracks out, okay? I'm gonna use import audio. Let's say all of this was the audio that they sent me, right? I'm gonna select those tracks, and instead of hitting add, we're gonna hit copy. So what add does, and this is big, remember this. Add puts those tracks into your session, but it keeps the file reference wherever those files live. So let's say they're in your like downloads folder. Those files will stay in that downloads folder, and this session might be on your audio drive. And what is going to happen is, oh, sorry guys, see, look at this. All over the place. What's going to happen is the files are going to live wherever you downloaded them or whatever hard drive they were on, and they're not actually going to get copied into your session. And then what's going to happen is you're going to work on the session for 3 or 4 days or whatever, and then you're going to say, oh, I don't need those downloads anymore. And then you're going to go open the session and you're going to be like, oh shit, where are my, it's going to say a bunch of files are missing. Copy actually copies those files into the audio file folder of this session. Again, this is one of those things where, man, I've done this. You only have to do it once and you'll never do it again. But I'm hoping that maybe I just saved you guys from having to lose audio files. Hard drive space is cheap these days. I don't care if you've got 5 copies of the same file. Always use copy. If there was a way for me to deactivate or just remove this add button, I would turn it off. And actually, you know what? I think there is a preference that says always copy files, but I think that might be when you're dragging and dropping. So, okay, I'm gonna go back to the web chat here. Okay. Hey, Chris, when adjusting the level on the folder, that doesn't affect the individual track automation within the folders, does it? Just like aux, but you can hide the tracks. Correct. That's exactly what it is. So think of, again, think of the kind of the signal chain. So perfect example. You know what? Let me go back to this here. I'll show you. I'm going to go and I'm going to pull open. This is a perfect example of actually how I would use this in a session. Okay, so we're going to use the kick as an option. You know what? Let's use a snare. It's a little further down the screen here. Okay, actually, I'll blow these up for you guys. All right, so let's pretend I'm going to duplicate this out 3 more times. And let's call this snare top, snare bottom, snare sample. Okay. And remember what I said before. I never actually use my template tracks. I just use them to duplicate. And then once I've got it, once I have my session built out, I turn them off and hide them. But we're not going to touch those. And you know what? Actually, let's duplicate this out a couple more times. Okay, so we'll call this 2, we'll call that 1, and we'll call this 3. So let's say I have 3 different snare samples. I'm going to put a marker in here. We'll call this the first verse, and we'll call this right here, we'll call this first chorus, okay? We're going to go to the volume automation for these samples. Pretend there are tracks here. Pretend there's audio here, okay? Let's say for the verse, I want to pull, let's say I have like an ambient snare sample on snare sample 3 here. I want to pull that down like, let's say 6 dB. And let's say I've got a really like thuddy, a real thuddy snare as well that I use to kind of add some weight to the chorus. So I've got that down a couple dB as well, and I'll make it a little bit more drastic here just so you guys can see it a little easier. Okay. So once I get to the chorus, so I'm verse here, snares, those are my snares, right? Once I get to my chorus, I want all the everything to come up, let's say to level volume here. And please ignore the fact that I'm using trim automation. There's a reason for that too. That's going to be like 5 episodes from now. Once we dig into mixing, there's a reason why I use trim automation instead of the regular volume automation, but we'll get to that. What was I saying? Okay. So this level is changing the level that's going into the snare auxiliary, okay? So when I just collapsed those tracks into the snare folder, all those automation moves are actually affecting here. So the signal going to here is different. So there is a little, and this is where you got to figure out what works best for you. If you're doing a lot of like heavy processing on your folder track here, maybe automating into doing a lot of heavy automation into that auxiliary might not be a good idea, because then all your thresholds are going to be off a little bit. For me, it's not that big of a deal because I kind of just treat it as one whole thing. But if let's say you've got an ambient sample that when you ride it down, it's not your compression on your folder track or your snare auxiliary isn't functioning the way it should, and then when the ambient snare hits it, all of a sudden it goes haywire. Well, then you might need to break out that snare outside of this, or do the majority of that processing on these tracks and just use this snare auxiliary for more of a kind of a summing track for overall brightness, not level dependent stuff. But what I'll do is I'll do some of these moves on the individual snare kind of feeder tracks. And then this snare auxiliary track will just be used for kind of the overall level. So if I need to ride up the whole snare, all the snares together, then I can do that here. But yeah, the actual automation is going into this snare auxiliary. So hopefully I answered that for you guys. Let's go down here. I see that you're importing, what you are importing is 4832. Is that what you actually use your sessions at? Yes, that is. So I think I mentioned that on the last episode. I use 4832. I mean, the bit resolution, go as high as you can. I think 32 is about as high, like 32 floating point is I don't know of any other DAWs that go higher than that, but there's no reason to not at this point use at least that. And then the sample rate, I think I mentioned this last time. I suggest using whatever the people who are you are working with use the most. So for instance, I have friends and colleagues that everybody they work with uses 44.1. So they just work in 44.1. There is a little bit of a difference, but is it that drastic? And it's like, no. I mean, I could add a couple dB of EQ on the master bus, and that's going to be a bigger difference than the difference between 48 and 44.1. So I prefer 48. When I first started mixing in the box, in order to figure out what worked best for me, I tried a bunch of different sessions at different sample rates, and I found that 48 for me was the sweet spot, where I got slightly better sonics from the plugins. I found like because I was doing so much like heavy lifting in plugins, I found like the plugins, a lot of the plugins at the time, maybe that's different now. I haven't gone back and done a A/B in a while, but I really actually liked 96, but at the time 96 was just a pain in the ass to deal with. It took up too much hard drive space. It took up too much processing power, too much DSP. Like, it was just a pain. Again, I haven't worked in 96 in a while. Maybe it's better now. I've got a new computer that I'm going to swap out here pretty soon. Maybe I can work in 96 and it sounds better. So I'll probably do an A/B, and maybe that would actually be a fun video to do. A fun live stream is to maybe even do that test live with you guys. I don't know the logistics of that, but maybe I'll figure that out. But yeah, 48. That's what the majority of the people I work with use, and if you're the person telling other people what to use, find what you like the best and just tell them to use it, and then just be consistent. I don't like having to change I've got an external clock on one of my converters. I don't like having to mess around with that. So ultimately, even if somebody sends me a 44.1 session, I'll upsample that to 48 because I want the all the plugins and all the everything to be running at a higher sample rate. So I found that worked better. Maybe that's in my head. I don't know. Off topic. Do you use heat at all? Not so much anymore. I actually used to when it came out. And I remember when Avid first introduced it. The really interesting thing was there's a plugin. I'll pull up this plugin here. It's one of my favorites. Come on. This is one of my favorite plugins. If you guys don't have it, I suggest you all get it. Cranesong Phoenix. And this plugin, let me pull it. Let me go back to my main screen here. This guy. If you don't have this plugin, I highly suggest it. This plugin was the plugin that got me off of using tape way back in the dinosaur ages. Even when Pro Tools was pretty much the norm, I was kind of not a late adopter of Pro Tools. I was using Pro Tools, but I would still cut drums and usually rhythm guitars to tape because I just liked the sonics of it. And the producer that I was working with at the time in the studio that we were working at, we had an MM1200, which is an Ampex multi-track, and we used to cut drums and rhythm guitars to that. And when this plugin came out, I'll tie this back into heat in a second. But when this plugin came out, and I think this one's called Phoenix 2. I think the other one was just Phoenix. But when this plugin came out, I bought it and I was playing around with it, and working on tape's a pain in the ass. If any of you have worked on tape, it's a pain in the ass. The tape machine has to get aligned all the time. The way that you sync it with Pro Tools isn't like super reliable. Obviously, you're dealing with the expensive tape. I think at one point the MM1200 like erase head wasn't like really erasing, so you'd hear a little like bleed through from whatever the previous take was. Like, it was just a pain in the ass, but it did sound great. So when this plugin came out, we did an A/B on I think 3 or 4 sessions where when we tracked drums, we would track to the tape machine, we would track to Pro Tools, separately at the same time. Like when the drummer was playing, we would track it to both machines at the same time. And then what I would do is once we had all the drum takes we wanted, I would dump them into Pro Tools. So I was able to get, I was able to basically build out a playlist to A/B. On one playlist, I had like digital straight into Pro Tools. On the next playlist, I had the analog dumped into Pro Tools off of the playback head, which sounds a little different than a sync head. I know I'm talking like archaic technology here, but bear with me. And then what I did was I took the Pro Tools only version and I used a Phoenix and I processed it. I found like a setting that I liked and I committed it. And I think I'm probably like Audio Suite. And we did this for 3 separate sessions. And what I would do was for every session, once we had, let's say the first song of drums done, the producer that I was working with, Scott, the artist, sometimes they cared, sometimes they didn't. Sometimes like, I can't tell the difference. And other times they were, in it with us and they were kind of getting tweaky. But I would do a blind A/B and I'd have like our assistant, I'd have them switch. So I didn't even know which one was which. And we level matched them. It was like, it wasn't any of that kind of, one was a little bit louder or one was none of that. Anyways, 3 separate projects. Every time we all unanimously, and this, I don't think any other piece of gear we've ever had this, unanimously picked the Cranesong Phoenix as our preferred sound of the drums. And that was an awesome day. And after the third one, we're like, okay, this is pretty obvious that like this is what we like. So let's just make this our process. So what we would do is we eventually stopped recording through the tape machine. We'd record straight to Pro Tools. We would do all our comping, we do all our editing, everything. And then once that was done, then I would just print the Phoenix with the setting that we wanted. And eventually what was cool about it was we could leave it on and kind of decide our settings later, maybe once the track was a little more built up. So anyways, pulling this back to Heat. The guy who is Cranesong, he, as far as I know, I think I get this right. He did the DSP. He did the algorithm for Heat, and I think it's kind of based off of I'm not sure which setting it's based off of, but I think it's based off of. I think it's based off of Phoenix, and I don't know which setting. I think there's 2 settings in Heat. No, I'm not going to be able to get my screen all the way over for you guys. I apologize because I changed my resolution. But the setting for Heat, I think one's like a tape and one is like more of like a tube. Maybe, you know what? Actually, it's probably more like the head converter. But anyways, Heat does sound really good. And if you like the sound of like analog and you don't have any analog gear, I highly recommend playing with Heat if your system can handle it. Big fan of the Cranesong stuff. My main converter is a Cranesong head and big fan of it. So, you like to be efficient. Yes, I do like to be efficient. This will make things easier. Stemming out mix. Yep, absolutely. 100%. Okay, let's get back to our mix setup here. So I'm going to go back into my template here, and I'm actually going to get rid of, let me go back to my main screen, guys. Thank you. Okay, I'm going to get rid of those snare tracks that I created here, just to get back to where this was. All right. Okay, so I think what I was talking about was once I have all of those tracks routed into, like I've got all my kick feeder tracks, my snare feeder tracks, my tom feeder tracks, everything is basically going to these auxiliary return routing folder tracks, whatever you want to call them. They're called routing folders, I think that's a proper name for them. But if I'm not going to use my parallel stuff, I can get rid of that as well. But what I like to do is then I'll take all of those tracks, and those are all routed. We'll come back to the routing for a second. Those are all routed to my drum bus, okay, which is right here. And this is the drums with the horizontal double line, which to me indicates it's like an auxiliary input stereo, because there's two lines instead. If it was mono, it would be one stereo. And it's just my cymbals, right? Okay, and then I'm going to drop all of those tracks into there. So now all those tracks just disappeared. Okay, so now let's get rid of. I'm not going to get rid of. Let's hide these parallel drum subs that I'm not going to use for this particular session. Okay. Now look how clean. Like you can send me as many kick and snares and everything else as you want. This is what my session is going to look like when I'm mixing a track. Kick, snare, toms, cymbals, and room. And for me, cymbals, just to kind of define a few things, kicks and snares and toms, pretty obvious. Cymbals, I like to do like hats, ride, overheads. If somebody's spot miking chinas, if somebody's put in crash samples, which I like to do, like on downbeats of sections, that type of thing, that will all go into cymbals. And then the more like ambient, lengthy, washy, maybe slightly distorted or slightly compressed, little dirtier sounds, all the room stuff goes into the room folder. Okay? But my goal is to, when I'm doing kind of my initial rough balance, and again, jumping ahead like 4 live streams from now, when we start kind of digging into more mixing stuff. But when I'm doing my rough balance, I'll get it to a point where I can control all of the drums really easily and start EQing and start processing the drums. And I've literally got 5 tracks here. I got kick, snare, toms, cymbals, and room. And if you need to fine tune stuff later, you just open up the folder. Yeah, ride something. Maybe add an EQ on one thing. Maybe add some compression on one of the kick samples, or roll off some low end, or do whatever you're going to do. And then you collapse it again. And then again, you're doing your volume moves with, here I've got a control surface here. You're doing your volume move. So I can very quickly build a drum mix really fast. You see the faders moving there. I've got a control surface. I can build a drum mix really fast, and it's so much easier than having to deal with like 30 drum tracks, right? And then the reason why I put this all into a drum folder, this is more for aesthetics. So when I'm not working on the drums, I collapse it. I've got on the control surface that I use, there's a way for me to open up those folders. There's a way for me to open up those folders to where I can hit a button on my control surface and those folders open up, and then I have control over all of the pieces again. So let's get out of this. Okay. So I'll go through, if somebody sends me their tracks and they've got percussion, I'll go and bring their percussion tracks, and I'll basically use my template tracks to kind of apply, either I'll duplicate my tracks and then drag their audio onto it, or I might use their track and drag my sends onto it and then group it. And all I have to do is modify a group, because if you can see over here, I've already set up all of my groups. I don't have to redo this, okay? See if I can bring this up a little bit. There we go. All of my groups are already set up. So I've got a group for drums, I've got a group for percussion, bass, guitars, and this corresponds with all of these tracks. And it corresponds with the template tracks. And so when I duplicate those, obviously the grouping stays with them. But if somebody sent me, let's say, a bunch of drum loops, I'll bring them into my session. I'll put them with these percussion. I'll select them all. So let me just do I'll give myself 5 blank tracks. Let's say these came from somebody else's session. I'll group them all together, and I'll do Command Control G And that lets me modify a group. So I'm going to go to my percussion group. And you can see right now the only tracks that are in it are my template tracks. Well, I'm just going to add those extra tracks to it. And now you see it, audio 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And now those are part of the group. Now, the other thing I got to do now is I also have to adjust the routing, because these new tracks, let's say they weren't new tracks. Let's say they came from somebody's session. They're routed to the main out, and I want them to go through the percussion bus. Here's another trick. If you have these tracks selected and you're going to go and set your output, you've got to go look. Okay, look at, I've only got the new tracks selected. I don't actually have any of that stuff selected. Okay, and there's a command in Pro Tools Shift Option. If you hold that, it will do the same thing to every track that you have selected. Okay, so if I had to go and route these to the percussion bus, I'm going to pull up my bus menu, and I showed you how to make your bus menu a little better to look at than all that crap, right? So all of my custom buses are in this second menu. I've got to go down and find the percussion bus. Not that big of a deal, but I'll tell you, I make mistakes all the time of accidentally, maybe I'm moving fast and I accidentally put it to the drum bus, or I accidentally put it to the percussion bus, or maybe my eye sees percussion comp for my parallel, and I'll scroll past the bus and I'll accidentally put it to comp. I'll show you a little trick. Instead of just grabbing the new stuff, also grab the stuff that is already routed the way you want, and use one of those tracks to select the bus output. Because look what's going to happen here. Already got a checkbox right there. So now you just have to navigate to that checkbox, click on it. And now it just routed. Hopefully you guys can see that. Now it just routed those new tracks. That's just a little, like, it seems insignificant, but you're not going to route it to the wrong thing if you're only going to have one check mark. If you're just clicking on that check mark, you're going to minimize the margin of error by a ton. So that's what I'll do. And then there's also a quick and easy way to get all your sends up here. There's something called track presets. And I'll do a separate video on making track presets, but I've got a track preset that just adds all of my sends. So what I can do is then I can add all of my sends by using my track preset. And I've got one here called Effect Sends. Then you click it. Takes a second for some reason. Hopefully we're still, there you go. Okay. So now it just added all of those effects sends there, right? And then what I'll do is same thing. I want to route an auxiliary send to my percussion comp. So instead of doing a new one here, right, and having to find it amongst this list with the only way I know what this is by the name. But again, man, if you spend a day setting up like 3 or 4 mix sessions, your eyes get all wonky. You make mistakes all the time. So how do you minimize the chances of making mistakes? Well, you come up with little tricks. So what I came up with was, here's the other problem. This copy and drag takes a lot of mouse clicks. So I don't do that either. I mean, unless there's like 1 or 2 tracks. But if there's a bunch of tracks, I don't do that either. We're going to use that same trick I showed you when you're setting your outputs. We're going to select all of the tracks, and I'm just going to hold Shift and Option, and we're going to go and click on the bus that's already there, already set up. We're going to go down to the checkbox, and we're going to click it again. It didn't really change those because they were already there, the ones on my template tracks, but it just added the exact same thing to now all of the new tracks that came in from my client. And now, with the exception of going through and naming these, now these tracks are routed. They have the proper routing. They have the proper grouping. They have all the effect sends. I'm going to turn off my template tracks because I don't need them anymore. And then I'm going to dump this into the folder track and collapse it down, and there we go. Okay. And that cleans that up as well. Gonna show you something. Here's a little insight into my craziness. Chris, if you always make the template tracks inactive, why don't you just have them inactive in your session? Tell you. Let's do that same exercise for, let's say, the B guitars. Okay, so I've got my B guitar template tracks. I've got my B guitar subgroup and then my B guitar parallel group or parallel input. Okay, which is off right now. If I had these turned off, because I'm not going to use them, if I had these turned off to start with in my template, let's do something here. Okay, let's say somebody sends me a session, same exercise. We're just going to do this a slightly different way. Somebody sends me a session that has 5 guitar tracks. Okay, I import those into my session. And now I need to kind of format them for my mix session. So I drag them over right next to the guitar stuff, right? I got to get the grouping taken care of. I got to get the routing taken care of. I've got to get the auxiliary sends taken care of. And then they'll be formatted for my workflow, okay? So those are like the 3 things. Okay, check this out. So let's say the grouping. Grouping's easy. We're going to select them all. We're going to hit the modify group control command. We're going to find our guitar B. You'll see what's currently in the group. We're going to add all the new stuff. Okay, grouping, easy, no problem. Outputs. I got to route these to the proper outputs. And what did we say was the best way to do it? Well, it's not just to select the new stuff. It's to select everything that's in that group and use the menu of the template track to select your output. Okay, watch what's going to happen here. Okay, I'm going to find the check mark. That's fine. I'm going to click on the check mark. Okay, set all the outputs properly. Then I get this menu. The output could not be active because the output's associated track is currently inactive. Okay. One button click to say okay to get rid of that menu. Okay. All right. So now we're going to add my auxiliaries with my track preset, right? And let me scroll over here because you guys probably can't see that. Hang on one second. Now I'm going to add the auxiliaries with my track preset. And like I said, I'll show you guys how to use how to build your own track presets later, but that's also in the manual if you want to figure that out before my next video on that. So let's wait while Pro Tools churns. It's interesting. So I'm running an HDX system, which is the crazy, like maxed out loaded DSP Pro Tools system. And I've always run a DSP system. That command takes way longer on the HDX systems than it does the native system. It must have something to do with the audio engine, but it's crazy. You're supposed to have the more powerful system, and it takes longer. Go figure. Okay, so that's that. But now we also got to get my guitar comp send set up on those tracks as well. So again, we're gonna go find all that, select them all, find the bus that's already set up the way that I want it, click on it, hold Option and Shift, go find the check mark. This menu pops up again. That menu to me is annoying. Is it annoying once? Not really. Is it annoying twice? It's starting to get annoying. But if you're doing this for 8, actually it's going to be more than 8 because you've also got to count the drum one. So it's going to be 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. For every time that you set an output for a group, the way that I showed you where you're clicking on the checkbox, if a track in that group is inactive, that menu is going to pop up. That's a pain in the butt for me because that's going to pop up probably 25, 30 times over the course of setting up a session. And like I said, I like to set up my sessions on a day when I'm not mixing. So I might set up 5, 6, 7 sessions in a day. So that menu is going to be popping up like 200 times. No, thank you. If those tracks are active, that menu doesn't pop up. And so it's just one of those find those little pain points and figure out a way around them. There's so many of those little things that just irritate me. And I'm sure there's stuff that irritates you. Find your pain points in your workflow, write them down, take note of them, and then find a way to work around them. Find a way to fix them and build that into your system. And once you build that into your system, you've just alleviated all of those hassles, at least as many as you can, that you're not going to be hitting every time you do that one process. That's going to be different for you than it is for me. But the system for doing that is identify your pain points. I call them pain points. Like, find those little nagging irritants within your workflow and then fix them. Okay. I'm going to take a couple questions. Going back to the chat. Okay, no questions yet. Does anybody have any questions? I think we're a little bit quicker today. What's your take on storage, hard drives, external setup, online backup? Okay, so I'm actually in the process of reevaluating this. Historically, again, I'm a dinosaur, so when I first started working on Pro Tools way back when, we used to use drives called SCSI drives, and the drives weren't very big and they were very expensive. And we used to they were rack mount chassis with these slots in them, and the SCSI drive would sit in like a case with a handle on it, and you'd kind of like push the thing, you'd turn a key and open it up. It almost looked like the thing from Ghostbusters when they get back to the station and they got to like unload the ghosts, and that they could push that thing in the machine and turn the key in and the ghost fly. It kind of looked like that. And once we started using Pro Tools a lot, like where we weren't just using it as an editor, like we were actually tracking whole sessions to it. The sessions got so big and the drive space was so small that we ended up having to, you'd have to get multiple drives for an album, and you'd have to keep track of what songs were on which drives. And we might only be able to keep 3 or 4 songs on a drive. And the other thing was, because the drives, although they were fast, they weren't that fast. We used to split sessions across 2 drives. So there's actually a window here. You don't really need to know this, but it's fun, geeky shit. There's a window here called disk allocation. I haven't looked at this window in years. What we would do, you can go in and for each track, you can set where you want that track to record to. So we would have 2 drives, let's say audio A, audio B. And what we would do is we would, let's say, have all our drum tracks allocated to audio A drive, and we would have all our guitar tracks and bass tracks and vocal tracks allocated to audio B drive. And this basically like split up the amount of bandwidth and storage to make the system run more efficiently. Like I said, I haven't used this folder in years, or not that folder, that window. But what the only way for a system to run efficiently was you had to run all your sessions off of a separate audio drive. You couldn't have that on your system drive. Nowadays, and I still do that, but nowadays the system drives, number one, most of them are solid state. You don't have to worry about a read write head moving around a drive. Like it's so fast that I don't know how actually integral it is to run your sessions off of a separate audio drive. There's other reasons why you would, but I still do. I have an audio hard drive that I have all my sessions on. I have my system drive. That's what it is. I've got a new Mac Studio that I'm ready to swap over the minute I get a break in some sessions. And it's got a 4 terabyte internal drive. I didn't want that because I typically I don't put a lot of stuff on my internal drive. It just came with it. That was the model that they had in stock at the time. I've been contemplating, and I've been asking around in forums and some of my contacts at Avid. I'm actually contemplating running all of my audios, all of my sessions off of a folder on the system drive that is within that gets synced to my Dropbox folder, or that's in my Dropbox folder, and is basically always being backed up in the background. I've heard a few people speculate that there's some issues with that, and I've heard 3 times as many people say they're already doing it and it's the best thing ever. So I'm going to try that. I'm not trying it on this system. This is an older system that I mean, maybe it would work, but on my new system, I'm going to definitely try that. For backups, I back up everything every night. I do redundant backups. I do back up to Dropbox, and then I also back up. I've got a hard drive dock, and I buy raw drives, and I'll put them in the dock, and I'll use a program called Cranesong to do my backups every night. So yes, lots of backups. What does it take out storage? Sorry guys, I'm trying to find my spot in the chat because my chat window froze on me. Very good point. Yeah, pain points. You know what? There's I'm gonna open myself up to a softball joke. There is something I've been in the process of developing a course without actually developing a course, like, for years. There's all these little, like, systems and all these little terminologies that I've been kind of subconsciously developing over the years. And it's interesting because so many, and all of the chapters in my course start with the letter P. And pain point is one of the things I talk about. So I talk about, just to kind of give you an example, this is a foreshadow down the road. Philosophy. I'm a big philosophy guy. Like, why are you doing things? Why are things the way they are? Think about how things affect other things, and why should you do things a certain way, and always be thinking just the philosophical reason of doing things and setting things up and how you like to do things. I'm big on that. I'm big on preparation, another P. I didn't actually go out to make them all P's. They just happen to be P's. Preparation. I'm huge on preparation, as you can probably see. Practice. I'm a big advocate of having, like, practice time. So if you're going to try something new out, yeah, you can try it while you're mixing for a client, but also try, like, set aside time where you're like, I've got 3 hours on Tuesday morning. That's my practice time. I don't have to get anything done. This is me playing with stuff. There's another one. P. Fucking playing. They're all P's. Anyways, foreshadowing. Pain point is one of those things. I've developed a lot of my little tricks because of pain points. So, let's go back to the chat here. Not having a shortcut to delete a track is a pain point for me. Okay. Yes. If you guys now, okay. Right click, scroll down, delete. Okay. That's an option, right? Track, delete does not have a quick key assigned to it. If you are using SoundFlow, you can make your own quick key for delete track, or Keyboard Maestro or anything like that. On my Stream Deck here, what track did I build out a bunch of stuff? Guitar B, right? Here. I'm going to delete these tracks. Highlight those. I just touched a button on my Stream Deck. Now they're gone. Huge fan of the Stream Decks and the SoundFlows. So yes, that is a pain point. And again, talk about pain points. That's how most of my SoundFlow macros have been developed and written, or my quick keys. They're all pain points. Like, having to hit 5 buttons to delete a track that's a pain point, especially when you can hit 1 button. So yes, pain point, pain point, pain point. And I recommend all of you guys, I've got a pad of paper. It's not here right now because I got my computer here. I've got a pad of paper and a pen within arm's reach at all times, or I have a notepad on my computer. Always have something where, if, like, you're doing a session, you're like, ugh, I hate that. Write it down. And then when you're not working in the session, you can go and deal with that. Okay. Sorry guys, I didn't switch over back to my screen. You guys didn't see those tracks getting deleted. Sorry. I have a button on my macro. How about the picture of your rig? Actually, that's a good idea. Let me pull that up right now for you guys. Go back to here. Okay. Let's go to main screen so I'm not in your way. All right, so this is my little setup at home. I've got a very modest setup at home. I used to have an awesome studio that I built, and during the pandemic, I moved up to Canada to do the last Nickelback album, and I had to kind of leave that place behind, and it saddens me. But I've done some of my best work in this kind of just makeshift setup here, and it's actually become really, really awesome for me. So what you're looking at, I've got a rack over here with kind of my mix bus and my guitar stuff. I've got a rack over here that you can't see. That's like my Pro Tools interfaces. And then I've got, it's a sit-stand desk. So this desk can raise up. And I've got everything is attached to the desk, including this screen, which is my big ultra-wide screen. And then I've got two small screens. This one's not active right now because it's for my new computer. I can't have a third screen going with my existing computer. But I've got a screen here, and a screen here. So once I get my new computer set up, I'll have these screens. I can drag whatever I want to them, right? This is the Avid S3, which I really love. This is the Avid dock. I've got an iPad here that runs the Avid app. Here's my Stream Deck with my SoundFlow macros. I've got my keyboard. I've got all my I like these like quick key keyboards, mainly because my muscle memory is so like years and years and years of muscle memory. When people call and ask how to do something, they're like, "Oh, how do I'm doing something. I keep on hitting the whatever button. What is that?" And it's easy just to look down at the keyboard and see like, oh, it might be a key that I don't use. Like, oh, snap start to time code. I never use that, but maybe somebody's pressing that all the time, and it helps me help them troubleshoot. So, here's my trackball that I've been using forever. Everybody always laughs at me when I show up to a studio and I swap out the big chunky Kensington mouse with the small. I think this is called an Orbit. I prefer the small balls. People always make that joke. Like, oh, you like the small balls, huh? And I'm like, yeah, it's just more comfortable for me. My hand sits on top of this. I've got the scroll wheel. This is a more comfortable thing for me. This is my monitor controller, and it's actually, no audio runs through this. That actually just syncs up with my interface. I'm using a DAD a Matrix Studio interface with Avid. Or it's an Avid interface, but it's a DAD converter. And then over here, you can see I've got the old rock solid controller. I do have the new ones as well, and I've got them on actually set up on another rig right now. So I put the old one here just so I've got it up and ready. Yeah, and all of these screens are mounted to the desk, so I can actually bring this whole desk up. Obviously, the speakers don't come with it. The speakers stay where they're at. But if I'm working on headphones or if I'm editing and I don't necessarily need to have, like, the audio doesn't need to be like I'm in the sweet spot, I'll raise this whole thing up and do a lot of work standing up. And man, that's made a huge difference on my back. Okay. What's your system workflow to print stems? Okay, so that's another good question. Stems have been a big pain in my ass for years, and there's a couple tools right now, Bounce Butler, and then also Andrew Sheps built his, I think it's called Bounce Factory, which is like an app within the SoundFlow kind of environment. Both of those are awesome. I still get kind of errors every once in a while, or things happen to where I still have to babysit it. But it really helps a lot. And what I'll do is, for the depending on what somebody wants, I will typically kind of grab groups of tracks. So like that kick auxiliary, I won't do all the individual kicks. I'll do that kick auxiliary. That's your kick. Snare auxiliary, that's your snare. Toms, there's your toms, right? And then when you get into other instruments, guitars, all that stuff, I'll usually do a pass of all of those separate. Some people don't need that stuff separate. Some people, they just want the groups. And in that scenario, I'll do my food groups, and I'll break out the guitars between my two groups. Maybe I'll have rhythms on one and lead on another, or electrics on one and acoustics on another, just to kind of break them up a little bit. But I'll do bounces that way using some sort of automated program. Or if I'm just doing a few, I'll just do them. So, the whole stem thing's become crazy. Here's the thing. The stems take time, and even with something like Bounce Factory, where you're like, yeah, okay, printing individual stems for a Daughtry song might take 3 hours, because I have to do real-time bounces when I'm using the hardware or I'm using my summing amp. I got to do real-time bounces. So if I'm doing 30 or 40 stems, because they want them all broken out, when I say they, record companies, Atmos mixers, music directors that need to build tracks for the live show, it can very quickly add up to like 40 tracks, because they want like each guitar on its own track. Well, 40 times, let's say, a 4-minute song, right? 160 minutes, 2 hours, almost 3 hours. And then you also got to take into account the time to kind of in between songs or in between passes to then go and set up the tracks the way you want, or set up Bounce Factory and have it do its thing. It takes a second, it takes a minute or two to kind of get the next pass set up. Doing a song can take 3 to 4 hours to print all those individual stems. Even if it's automated, that ties up my rig. So I can't do any other work while that's happening. Yes, I can run it overnight. I've had a lot of issues where I've woken up the next morning and like it stalled on the third stem. And now I got to start over. And now I didn't plan on that. I planned on to run overnight. So I'm still printing stems during the day. I do it when I'm doing admin work, or I'm cleaning up the studio, or, I just build it into my morning. I'll wake up in the morning and turn on the coffee machine, hit go on the Bounce Butler or whatever I'm using. And then I'll just kind of hang around in case there's any errors. But it ties up my rig. I can't do any other work on it. So it's still a little bit of an inconvenience having to deliver all of that stuff, but I get it. It's kind of where we're at. So, I'm going to do a whole video on deliverables. Not only how I do them, but I also want to have a little bit of a interactive conversation with you guys about like what's reasonable, what's not reasonable. I find some labels now are they just want everything, even if they don't know if they're going to use it. They don't want to pay anymore. It takes, like I said, it takes up time. My rig's being taken up. I still have to babysit it. I still have to then deliver it, either put it on a thumb drive and send it out, or upload. Like there's still an inconvenience cost. There's still a time cost. And so that needs to be accounted for. So I do charge for stems, unless it's just a few for a client where they're just like, I just need these 2 tracks for, my live playback or whatever. Or I just need all like the food groups, no big deal. Here's 8 stems. Doesn't even matter if it's through your master bus. I just kind of want it for a variety of reasons. No problem. But if I'm doing 40 stems, and that's just part of the deliverables, you got to work that into your costs or charge extra for it for sure. But like I said, we'll do a whole deliverables live stream on that for sure. Here's another one on deliverables. Hey, Chris, when doing deliverables after a mix is signed off on, what do you send? Instrumental vocals up, TV mix stems. Are they food groups or each individual track? Ever use Bounce Butler? Okay, yeah, so obviously just talked about that. But I have what's called a mix pack, and that terminology I actually got from CLA. My mix pack, when I'm done a mix, is there's a final mix. Some people call that the master mix. Terminology's gotten weird because without the kind of typical studio hierarchy, everybody kind of learns a different thing. Like, obviously there's all the memes going around online about stems versus multi-tracks and people not really realizing the difference between the two. There's a big difference between stems and multi-tracks. I don't need to beat that horse to death. I think you've all probably figured that out by now. If you haven't, just go Google or go onto YouTube and do multi-tracks versus stems. They're two different things. The same thing kind of happened with when people would say, here's the master mix. Anytime somebody would see master, old school engineers didn't have an issue with this. It's kind of like maybe people who didn't spend a lot of time in like a big old studio. They see master, they think it's mastered. And that vernacular is just way too close for me, like, to take a chance on. So I refer to my master mix as the final mix. So I label it final. From there, I do an instrumental, no vocals. I do a TV mix, which is everything except for the lead vocals. So the background vocals are in, but lead vocal is out. I will do a vocal only, and depending on the arrangement of the song, I might do a lead vocal only and a background vocal only. And the idea behind that is if somebody wanted to make changes, they could take the instrumental, the lead vocal only, and the background vocal only, and they can then kind of use those to make whatever they needed. If I'm doing a lead vocal only and a background vocal only, sometimes I won't do the TV mix, because you could also take the instrumental and the background vocal and put it together, and there's your TV mix. And then the last one I usually do is if there has been an element, it's usually the vocal. If there has been an element throughout the mix process, either for me or for the client, that there's been some question mark on vocal level, lead guitar level, snare drum level. Let's say it's like you send out a mix and everybody's like, this sounds awesome, love everything. And one guy's like, I don't know about the snare drum level. And all the other guys are like, it sounds great to me. And he's, I think it's a little hot. Okay, well, let's bring it down and hear it. And okay, bring it down. I don't know. I think it needs to come back up. Okay, well, it comes back up. And then, okay, I don't know. What do you guys think? You know what I'll do? I'll print one of each. So I'll print whatever the final mix is. Then I might do like a snare drum down half a dB. Or it's typically vocal up. I typically do a vocal up. So my mix pack, final mix, instrumental, vocal onlys. That might be lead vocal and background vocal combined, or it might be lead vocal and background vocal separate. TV mix, potentially everything but lead vocal. And then a vocal up, snare up, lead guitar solo up. Any of those kind of little alternates that if there was a question mark during the mix. If there was never a question mark about any levels, I might not even do a vocal up. I might just leave it as is. So hopefully that answers that question. Like I said, we'll get into deliverables with all the stem stuff after the fact, because there's a little bit of a conversation about that. Any thoughts on updating latest versions of Pro Tools? I know people like Serban are still using older versions because they think it sounds better. Interesting. I've actually never heard the sonic thing. I've never heard somebody say the older version sounds better. Obviously, a lot of people stay on the older versions because they find a version that's stable and that just works and they stick with it. I used to be that way. I unfortunately now, and also because I do a lot of production, I'm not just mixing, I do a lot of production as well. I like to have the latest and greatest kind of plugins, and a lot of the feature sets that Avid has been building into the latest versions of Pro Tools are things that I've been wanting for years. So I don't want to say I'm like on the bleeding edge, but I've been pretty quick to jump to a new version. And then if something's fucked up in it, then I'll just revert back to an earlier version. But for the most part, I'm staying pretty up to date. But yeah, I mean, if you have your system down and you have plugins that you know work, and you have a system that works, and you don't have to worry about, oh, I'm on an old system and somebody sent me a session with a plugin that's new and that plugin's not compatible with the old system. If you don't have to worry about that and you found something you like, stay on it. Just because there's something else doesn't mean it's better. And if you're not going to use it anyways, then there's no point, right? I've got a client who's still on Pro Tools 12, and trading sessions back and forth with him is a little difficult because there's some stuff that kind of just I don't want to say gets lost in translation, but there's a few things that he just doesn't have. And then also there's a few workflow things. Like I think he doesn't have commit. It's either commit or freeze. One of those things wasn't on his version. So when he does bounces, or if he wants to commit an amp simulator plugin, he actually routes that to a new track and then just does a record pass. And I'm like, dude, you could select these 10 tracks of guitars and hit commit if you were in a newer version. So you got to just weigh the pros and the cons. Some people it's cost. I know a lot of people just don't want to have to pay the money of getting the new version or staying on a plan or a subscription. But when it comes to Pro Tools, I'm usually pretty current because, like I said, over the last few years, they've actually been implementing features that's worth upgrading, at least to me. So, inactive audio tracks are just used to set up the tracks you import, and then you hide them. Okay, so yeah, exactly. But I think I mentioned, maybe you weren't on yet. I actually don't put them. I don't make them inactive in my template. They're not inactive. So if you see over here, like the lead vocal, which is LV, right? So here's all my lead vocal stuff. I leave these active to avoid there was a menu that popped up that is a pain in my butt. Every time you change an output while using the existing track, a menu pops up saying this track is inactive. We couldn't do that. It does it in the background, but it says we can't do that. So I leave them active until I get everything set up, and then I make them inactive and hide them. And I have a quick key for that. I have a quick key for make selected tracks inactive and hide. I've got so that's really easy process for me. So yeah, let's go back to here. Saw photos of Chad's place, and he has Neumann monitors too. Yep. I mean, he wanted some big monitors and just kind of asked me what I wanted to work on, and so I find with the Neumanns. The Neumanns sound very consistent from like the different sizes. So there's some speakers that, I mean, I know all the manufacturers try to do that, and I think certain manufacturers do that better than others. I actually find the Neumanns to be pretty consistent. The big ones just get louder and bigger. And so, yeah, he wanted some new monitors, and when we started probably about halfway through the last album, and I think we were using Genel X, and he wanted something new, wanted something bigger, louder. And so I wanted something that was familiar for me, but could also get loud enough for him and the rest of the band. So yeah, we got those. The Neumanns, I've been using those for, I don't know, probably 10 years now. And I mean, like with everything, I did a shootout. I tend to gravitate towards monitors that have like a quick decay. And if you've ever shot a room and you've seen like a waterfall spectrum or spectrograph or whatever they call it, where it shows not only the peaks of the frequency response, but how long they decay. Certain speakers, especially kind of in the low end and in the low mid, certain speakers, even though the frequency response might be what you want, certain frequencies kind of hang around a little longer than others. And I think that's one of the reasons I liked NS10s, even though I hated the frequency response of NS10s. I liked NS10s because they're pretty quick decays. Sound comes out of the speaker and it kind of dies away. It doesn't resonate for a while. And so when I was looking for new monitors, and I had NS10s next to these, and I would switch back and forth. Now I've gotten to a point where I don't need the NS10s anymore, and I just actually sold them. I found these to have kind of that. They don't sound like NS10s at all. They don't have the frequency response of an NS10s, but they have like almost like the quickness, or they don't resonate, like have a long resonant kind of thing. And I started digging into that, and it turns out that, and I'm not an acoustician and I'm not an electrical engineer, and by any means, but what I seem to find a little bit of a consensus on is it has a lot to do with the cabinet design, and these are sealed cabinets. There's no ports. And it's interesting how the majority of the speakers that I tend to gravitate towards don't have big, wide open ports. They're either sealed cabinets or they have some sort of like transmission line that's not just a big port. And I think that probably has something to do with the quick decay. Like I said, I don't know. But I tend to gravitate towards them. And they were, the frequency response of the Neumanns are such that not everything just sounds immediately good. Like you have to work a little bit. But it's also not like an NS10 where it's like, you're just like, I don't want to listen to music through these. Like I like just sitting in the studio listening to music. And so I like to have speakers that sound good, but I can't have them sound too good. And that's kind of the one of the problems I had with the Genel X is like everything just sounded awesome. And then you would take it out or you put headphones on and you're like, this doesn't sound so good. The Neumanns are a good mix for me. So, and the big Neumanns, when I build another studio, which I eventually will, I'll probably do another AB with everything again. I'm not super brand loyal to anything. I mean, I've got companies that I work with and that are very good to me, and we have a relationship, more of a support relationship, not just like I'm getting stuff for free or whatever, but I'm getting support. I'm getting, if something goes down, I can get a replacement, or they let me try stuff out for an extended period of time so I can actually do some mixes on it. So I do have my like preferred companies per se, but if I go get 5 speakers in and there's one that works better, I don't want to say sounds better, that works better, that's the one I'm going to go with. So yeah. Having a sit-standing desk is a future purchase I'm building up to. I love mixing standing up. My solution at the moment is putting my MacBook on a stack of books on a table. Absolutely. Yeah, man, my back, like my lower back is just pooched. It's been a constant problem for probably like 10 years. And I've pretty much, forced myself to get up every couple hours. I'm constantly stretching in the studio. I'm going for little walks. I'm doing everything I can. And to be perfectly honest with you, like over the course of, let's say, a 10 or a 12-hour workday, the amount of hours that I actually need to be like sitting in the sweet spot is, I don't know, maybe a quarter of that. Maybe that might even be too much. So I'll go back and forth. And like I said, if I'm editing or if I'm, producing or doing something where, I mean, I like to move around, and yeah, standing up's way better. So, Melodyne ARA is my favorite thing to happen in Pro Tools in the last 5 years. Yes, I found it very buggy. I'm still not in love with it, believe it or not. I'm still using the plugin a lot. Especially if here's the thing, if I'm sitting down to edit vocals, I'm like, that's my itinerary for today. I'm editing vocals. I will still pull up the plugin and use the plugin. I feel like it works better. Even just the window layout and being able to move the plugin window around and have it, either be on another screen or, to me, that still works better. If I'm in the middle of a session and there's like, fuck, that vocal, just that one spot bugs me every time, then I'll turn it on and fix it really fast. Or I might just audio suite it I'll pull up auto tune and graph it really quickly and then, and just commit it and it's done. So, do you have a mobile rig? If yes, what's included in that? No, I don't have a mobile rig. People are shocked. I do that on purpose. I did for a while. I had a laptop with Pro Tools on it, and I found, and I carry my backpack with my laptop in it pretty much everywhere I go. And I found people were, the expectation was, you are ready to work at any time. And I'm like, nope. If we're out for dinner and somebody comes up with a vocal idea and they're like, hey, the manager of the restaurant's going to let us use the room next door, let's go cut this vocal. And I'm like, no, I'm having dinner. Like, that's what, if you guys want to work, we'll go back to the studio. So I actually, on purpose, don't have Pro Tools on my laptop to almost force a little bit of a technological boundary. But if you are the, and I'm also pretty stationary in the sense of like my mixing. And if a lot of the projects that I'm producing, I'm usually working at a studio that either has a good rig or sometimes what I'll do is I'll just take my computer. I've got my computer, which is kind of down below me here. It's in a case, like a SKB case, and I can unplug everything out of the back, put the covers on it, pick up the computer, go, and then it's just a matter of plugging their system, all their converters and everything, and USB and all that stuff into mine, and I'm off. So it's not that big of a deal. Like I said, I almost want to make that a little bit of a hassle, so it's not so easy for people to be like, oh yeah, let's start recording on the subway. And I'm like, no, not happening. Any advice on getting more recording and mixing clients when you're starting out? I'm not going to really dig into that too much right now because it's a little bit off topic. We could do a whole video on that. There's no answer. I said I wasn't answering. Now I'm answering it. There is no answer. The only advice is quick advice, and we'll dig into this later. People will want to work with you for, let's say, one of 4 reasons. And this probably applies to any, independent contractor or any person running their own business or whatever you want to call that. Your price, okay? Some people, cheapest is not the best. I know people who won't hire the people who are really cheap because then there's an assumption that they're not that good, okay? So don't always assume that cheaper's better. But price, how quickly you can get something done, obviously how good you are, like what's the final product. And then the other one I will say is, do people just like to work with you and do you get along with people? Like, is there a fit from just a personality standpoint? So I think what I would recommend to anybody is figure out which one or two of those things is probably your best bet on getting work. They all got to be good. Like you can't be like, oh, well, everybody loves my personality, but I suck. That's not going to get you work. Like, you've got to be at least a minimum level at all of them. But figure out the one that you think is like your strength. And then you got to target clients that's the most important thing to them. So for instance, I don't target clients who need stuff really fast. I don't work fast. So I have friends who they get all of their work because the A&R guy calls them and says, hey, I'm gonna have a track in your Dropbox in an hour. I need a mix tomorrow. We've got mastering booked for 4 p.m. tomorrow. I need the mix done. I'm not that guy. For a variety of reasons, I'm not that guy. I don't get clients for that. So I don't go after those clients at all. I would say I go after clients who want top quality and who ultimately I get along with and they get along with me. It's a personality thing. So those are the 2 things for me. I'm not going after clients that pay a like high top dollar, and I'm also not interested too much in doing mixes or productions for like dirt cheap. I'm like, that's almost a side note for me. My main 2 things are I'm going to focus my clientele to my strengths, which I think are like top quality work, might take a while, might be expensive, but it's going to be, by the end of the day, it's going to be really good. And also like a personality fit. As you can see, I like to talk. I like to have fun. I like enjoying myself when I'm in the studio, and I want to work with people who also like that process and we get along. So I would kind of figure out what you're good at. If you're not super talkative and you're not overly personable, don't worry about finding those clients. Maybe find a bunch of remote clients so you're not in the room with them. Maybe find people who are also kind of like, listen, you don't need to be my best friend. I don't need to be your best friend. Just get the work done fast and for cheap. And you're like, cool, I'm going to go find those guys. So you got to determine what you're good at and what your strengths are, and then go find the clients who that's what they're looking for. So that could be a quick and easy question of when you're, talking to record company guys, managers, whatever, ask them, talking about pain points. Be like, hey, with your current roster of mixers that you send stuff out to, what's your biggest challenge? And some of them might be like, man, I can't find good work for a good price. It's all too expensive. I have to pay top dollar for everything. And then maybe you say, hey, you know what? I can undercut the other guys and I can do a really good job. I'm willing to do your next, couple mixes for free as a test. Maybe you're not. You got to figure out what you're good at. Okay. Like I said, I wasn't going to answer it. And there you go. We'll do a whole video on that. So I'm going to get back into the session really quickly here because it's we're running up to 2 hours. 2 hours sneaks up on us fast. Okay. If you've got some more questions, put them in here. Somebody just said upgraded cheap two-way monitors, KH310s. Bought them for the same reason. Expected to hear new things buried in the mix. What I found was I heard more of each instrument. No magic, just detail. Yep. That's kind of what they are. They're not overly... They're not hyped, but they're not like gross like an NS10. Yeah, I like listening to music on it when I'm just listening casually. I like it. I enjoy it. But they also make me work. I used to call NS10s the treadmill. Like, nobody fucking likes running on the treadmill, but it works, right? If you're trying to get in shape, you're trying to lose weight, you build up your cardio, running on a treadmill for an hour or 2 or 3, it works. Nobody likes it, but it works. So NS10s were the treadmill. These are a little bit more like, I don't know, it's more like a Peloton. So, all right, let's get back to the session here. Okay. All right, so I kind of gave you the overview of how I get my tracks. Oh, hang on a second. Everything's having a little bit of a freak out. Here we go. How I get my tracks kind of all set up in my template, ready to go. All of the grouping is already done. And here's another thing. We're running out of time today, but I want to show you something in the grouping menu. Okay, so I hit, so if you're making a new group, let me get out of this. New group, create group. A lot of people also don't know how to kind of manipulate groups. So when you make a new group, you can have it be just an edit group, just a mix group, or mix and edit group. And there's this little checkbox up here called Follow Globals. And if you click on this little Globals tab, this will show you any group that has that Follow Globals checked. These are the parameters that will be grouped. And if this box is unchecked, then when you go to attributes, these are the parameters that are specific just to that group. And so, again, one of the reasons why I have these template tracks is because not all of my groups are the same. So I do have my global setting the way that I want, and everybody has their global setting a little bit differently. Okay, so for instance, here's my drums. Drums, percussion, bass, all of that stuff, okay? All of my food groups are following globals. Okay, I'm going to go down to the next menu, which is, these are my my drum subs, okay? These are my, the drum subs, all the tracks that feed into the auxiliary, the routing folder, sorry. All of those have their own group, but they don't follow the globals. The only thing that they follow is volume and solo. So that way, when I have groups on and I've got my balance the way that I want it, but maybe it's just hitting my folder track a little too hard, I can turn that group on and just pull them down a little bit. But all the other stuff is not grouped. So if I hit mute on one of them, they're not all going to mute, The only thing I want is the volume and solo. That's it. Okay. And you can customize however you want that. Again, that's going to be one of those things where you're going to start with globals on everything, and then you're going to find yourself doing moves within groups, and you're like, I hate it. I don't want to have to turn the group off every time I do that one thing on that one group. You don't have to. All you'd have to do is just uncheck follow globals, give it its own custom set of attributes to follow. There's another, if I go down to here, so these arrows, this is a group that I have for, let's open these back up, and I'm actually going to turn these back on. Remember how I said I've got parallel drum processing set up for each. Here, I'm going to turn these on real quick. Should make these active for each, for each instrument, let's say. So I've got a kick parallel already set up. I've got a snare parallel already set up. I've got a tom parallel set up. Well, here's the thing. A lot of the time, I'm going to process those separately. That makes sense. But then there's a lot of scenarios where, let's say I am using a kick and a snare parallel, let's say with a compressor on it. I'll just throw anything on this just for argument's sake. Okay. Doesn't matter what it is. So now I've got the unprocessed kick bus. I've got the parallel kick bus with the compressor on it. Those are being treated separately, right? Now let's say I get to a point in the mix where I'm like, I'm loving everything about the kick drum and the snare drum, except I just need them to be a little bit brighter. Okay? Well, what's going to happen is I could choose to put an EQ on just, let's say, the unprocessed snare bus, or the parallel snare bus, or what I can do is I can put an EQ, the same EQ, and I'll just use a channel strip for now. I can put the same EQ on both of them and then make the same move. So I'm just adding a little bit of top end. But now what I got to do is I got to copy that over, right? So what I've done is I've set up all of my buses, my unprocessed buses, and then the parallel bus that goes with them. I've grouped those together in such a way that I've got two insert slots that are grouped, D and E. So now, if I need to make my snare drum a little brighter, I can put that same EQ on both tracks as long as I put it in either slot D or slot E. And when my groups are on, and I'll pull that open and I'll pull that one open. Now one's the one on the left is for the unprocessed, the one on the right is for the processed. Parameters move together. That only exists, that plug-in grouping only exists for D and E. That's something I know that. I've developed that. I know that if I need to make the same move and control them together, I can do that there. A, B, and C slots on the insert are completely independent. So there's this group window. This is so powerful. I'm trying to think. I'm going to go look to see what else I have that's not following globals. Well, there's a good one. I've got all my master faders for my I've got master outputs, like actual master faders for all my outputs that feed my mixing bus. Those are all routed or all grouped together, and the only thing I want those to follow is volume. I don't want anything else to be grouped. So that way, if I just want to bring everything coming through my summing amp down a little bit. Effects, all I want to group in the effects. Actually, you know what? Auxiliary sends, I think, automatically, or no, sorry, because it's routed to a VCA fader, this automatically gets assigned. We'll talk about VCA faders later. I was hoping we get to that today. Maybe we will. Maybe I'll blow through this. Okay. Again, I don't mean to refer you to the manual. I know you're like, Chris, you're supposed to tell us how to use all this shit. But basically, this is like Pro Tools 101. So if you don't know this inside and out, pull open the manual. But this modified groups, like really understand how you want your tracks to group and set up your groups. Every group doesn't have to have the same attributes. You can have every group be something different based off the way that you work. But you need to think about that, write stuff down, plan for it. Don't do it while you're mixing. Do it during your, let's see, another P, plan. Do it during your preparation or your practice or your planning or all the rest of the P's that will be part of my course in the future. So another big thing I do want to talk about here is VCA faders. And the reason why I want to talk about VCA faders is because for my workflow, they are absolutely integral. So if you don't know what a VCA fader is, a VCA fader basically gets applied to a group. So any group of tracks can be applied, assigned to a VCA fader. And all the VCA fader does, I'll use my background vocal one so you can see it. All the VCA fader does is control volume, so the fader level, solo, mute, input. I'm not going to be able to turn on input because there's no input, and record. And then you can also then have group this to something else if you need to for whatever reason. Like I said, I've got all of my VCA faders on a group as well, so I can trim everything down at one time if I want. The cool thing about this, and people often ask me, they're like, well, why don't you just group your tracks and then do all of that stuff on the tracks over here? Let's say I've got a bunch of automation going and I just want to hear that whole thing just trimmed up a little bit. I'm like, I love the sound of everything. I just want to hear it louder. It's really easy to just bump it up here a couple dB and it just does that move for you. Whereas doing that, you'd either have to go to trim automation mode, or you would have to then go and switch your views to volume and make sure all your volumes are grouped and then trim them all up. Here's the other thing that I really love about VCAs. You can have tracks grouped together, but when it's assigned to a VCA, the volumes are independent. So you can still move these all you want independent without having to turn a group on and off when it's assigned to a VCA. And then if you want to move them together, you use the VCA. The other thing that's really helpful on a VCA for me, because I'm on a control surface, is I've got a bank on my S3 that's only my VCAs, and I could get to that bank in one button. And then once I'm on that bank, I can hit what's called a VCA spill on any one of those faders, and every track that's assigned to that VCA spills out onto my 16 faders. So a problem that a lot of people have with control surfaces is having to, scroll through, nudge through a bunch of tracks to get to the track you want. Navigating what tracks are on which faders is actually probably the hardest thing to do on a control surface. And I have found having a bank of VCA faders on my control surface and then spilling them, I can navigate to anything. If you said, pull up the kick drum, I hit my one button to pull up my VCAs, I spilled my drum VCA, and then my kick drum's there. Really fast. And then there's one button to get out of that mode. And then I'm back. So I'm always staring at my VCAs, and then I hit the one button to basically get into the VCA, to get into the groups that are assigned to that VCA. Hope that made a little bit of sense. And again, I use these little symbols. I use the little delta symbol because that's ultimately kind of what a VCA fader is doing. It's moving things relative to what the levels are. It's not like an absolute up and down. It's an offset, right? I think we went over effects, kind of setting up your effects and returns, and we also went over the master stuff, the master bus stuff. So one thing I did want to talk about a little bit, because I actually got some questions about this on the last live stream. As you've noticed, there's really not, I've added a couple plugins in here. There's really not a lot of plugins in this session, okay? And the reason for that isn't necessarily because I want everything to be different every time. but I would prefer to, I like to change it up a little bit. It actually doesn't change that much, but I like to have a couple different templates. I like to have one with no plugins. And when I say no plugins, yes, there's some plugins in it. Like I've got my AB plugin. I've got my Sound ID reference on my headphone amp. I do have some stuff set up with the bass, which are just kind of like chains to run DIs through. Bass is one of those scenarios where I can pretty much guarantee I'm going to get a DI bass. And if somebody gives me something else, maybe it's good, maybe it's not. But there's a certain amount of processing that I'm probably going to do with a DI on every track. So I just have that already set up, ready to go with the plugin. That's pretty much the only thing that's kind of in this. But what I'll typically do, and I think I answered this quickly last time, is I've got my empty template. I've also got like my kind of traditional, like 9 times out of 10, I could do a mix pretty fast with this. And what that is it's the same setup with routing, everything exactly you see, except every one of my template tracks has an SSL channel strip on it. Okay. So that's already set up. And then the other thing that it has is every one of my subgroups, my food group subgroups, will have either a fab filter on them, fab filter Pro Q3, or another pretty like expansive EQ that I can really do some like digging in. And the idea with that is I'm doing a lot of my creative carving on the actual channel strips, and I'm using my kind of my subgroup EQ to almost do more like surgical stuff. That's the opposite to way some people work. A lot of people actually do all their surgical stuff on the track, and then they'll do their kind of creative stuff on the bus. I've got a template that actually is that. So I make the call based off of, the project. It changes from project to project. And then I also have on my effects, I'll have kind of my go-to reverbs and delays already set up. I do have those templates. If somebody sent me a mix, it's almost 9 o'clock where I'm at right now. If somebody sent me a mix right now and said, hey, we need this for tomorrow, like it's urgent, we need to go fast, I do have this version of a template with lots of plugins and my kick chains, like all my kick, my kick bus, my kick subgroup and my snare subgroup already have chains of plugins built on them. I can bring those in very easily. The other thing is if I start with my empty session, because all the names are the same, everything's the same, I can use that import session data, and I can go to my template with all my SSL stuff or all my chains, and I can use a little thing here called match tracks. And anytime there's a track that's where the name is matched, it will match it up. Or even if the name's close, it will try to match it up. But because my names are exact, and then I can just go into data and say, nope, just bring me all of my plugins and plugin assignments. And I hit that button and it brings all of that stuff in. And then this empty template actually starts sounding like a mix really fast. But that's a separate step for me. And I have that available, but what I like to do is I like to kind of treat each mix a little bit on a case-by-case scenario where I'll listen to the song and be like, okay, yeah, you know what? Let's put an SSL channel strip on everything and start from there. Or, you know what? This is going to take a lot of like repair work. These tracks are not good. And then I'll flip it. I'll go fab filter on all of the individual feeder tracks. And then I'll use maybe the SSL channel strip on the buses or the subgroups. So I try to approach each mix based off of what it needs, as opposed to try to force one template on everything. And it also keeps things a little bit fresh as well. So, okay, I'm gonna go back here, guys. Let's do one more round of Q&A, and then I think that's probably good for the night. Let me see where I ended off. Do you have a mobile rig? Getting advice? Upgrade cheap? Okay. So right now I'm just seeing one question here. Do you use any room correction software? I do for headphones. I don't for my room right now. Believe it or not, the room that I'm in, which is, again, this is not a purpose-built studio by any means. The room actually sounds pretty good. And I think a big reason for that is my ceilings are not that low. They're actually pretty high. And the back wall behind me is, I mean, that's probably, I don't know if you can tell how far that is, probably like 16 feet, maybe 18 feet. And I don't listen very loud. So I actually don't get a lot of reflections. So I don't use a lot of room. I don't use any room correction here. And then, oh, you know what? I see more. I do see more things here. Sorry, guys. My chat's not updating. Sorry, guys. The room correction stuff's really cool though. Like the Neumanns at Chad's studio, they've got we've got the sub that has the room correction stuff built in, and I do have that going on it. And then also the DAD converters that I use, they have their routing matrix that's called DADMON. It has EQs. It's not an auto calibration thing. Like you have to set them yourself. But I'm relatively, when I built my studio, like I got really familiar with shooting the room and adjusting EQs manually to make up for certain things. So I'm pretty familiar with using that stuff. So I'm not afraid to dig into that. But yeah, the room correction stuff's good. It's funny how a lot of people really, really rely on it. And I know some people who like everything's through it. And I find a lot of those people have problems. Like they struggle. So I think it's one of those things. Use it as a tool. If your mixes are better with it, then keep mixing through it. But practice without it and see what happens. Do a couple mixes without it. See what happens. Might end up being better without it. I don't know. Next question. Mentioned earlier you're going to do a talk about why you use volume trim versus volume automation. Oh, I can talk about that really quick, actually. Thank you for reminding me. Okay. All right. Let's just use this track for. Okay. I'm going to write some volume automation, and I'm going to do it on the volume. We got. Here's something you can see. The other, I don't. Let me go back to my screen here. Picture. There we go. Okay, here we go. All right. I don't know if you can see this, but there's two lines there. There's like a blue line and then like a faint blue line underneath. So that is indicating that my VCA fader. Actually, I'm going to go to my VCAs here real quick. Okay, watch that blue line underneath it here. You can see it jumping around. Sorry, kind of little laggy. That's indicating that there's an offset with the VCA fader that's grouped to that. So I just wanted to point that out because there is that there. So here I'm going to write some automation. I'm just going to use the pencil tool to write it. It's irrelevant. Oh, look at that. Cool. Done. All right. So you know what? That's not going to work. Let me do a more freehand thing. All right. Okay, so I've just done some automation. Now let's go back to this this view where, let's see what's going on here. Okay. Why isn't that moving? That's strange. That's weird that it wants to just snap back there. That's kind of buggy. Well, here's actually why I like using this. Oh, I know why it's not moving, because there's no the automation is not crazy enough. There we go. This will be better. Sorry, guys. I'm typically not doing automation that looks like that. Okay. You see the background vocal fader moving there? Okay, it's moving, right? I want to make that, just that track, a little bit louder or a little bit quieter. If I grab that fader, okay, and I turn it up a little bit, watch what happens. As soon as I hit play, it snaps back. That didn't do anything, okay? So this is always just going to go to wherever it's got to go to. It's stuck there. So there's a couple ways of trimming this, right? And when I say trimming means I want all of these moves up by a couple dB. That's one way of trimming it, okay? That's not very easy on a control surface, or it's not easy to do from the mixer page, or it's not even really that like inspiring to do when you're trying to do like a mix. And here's the other thing. Most people, if I'm working off of existing automation that somebody sent me a session, most people they're doing their automation in the volume lane, okay? And the reason why I say that is because there is a way to trim this easily by switching to this mode. So I just changed this to, it's still going to read the automation, but now I'm in a trim mode. So now while this fader, or while all this automation is moving, my fader's not going to move, okay? This is just standing still because I don't have any trim moves. There's no trim automation. There's two volume automation lanes. There's regular volume and trim automation. Right now, there's no trim automation. So when I'm in this trim mode, it just stays there. So now if I want all of those moves up, and you can see that little delta symbol down there, if I want all of these moves up by, let's say, 2 dB, I can just do that. And I can do it on the fader. And I can do that on my control surface, right? Easy. Very easy to do. Okay, so why don't I just use that? Well, I do, but I like to do a lot of my automation on the volume lane because everybody else does their automation I like to do my automation on the volume trim line because everybody else does their automation on the volume line. So that way I can leave their stuff intact and then I can do all of my trim moves over top of it. Okay? So again, this is obviously not actually relevant, but let's say that's what I wanted to automate. I can do it that way, right? So now when I go into this, I'm always habitually, I do all of my automation in the volume trim lane. And now what's going to happen is you say, okay, well, great. That works really well if you've got automation on the blue volume lane. But what if I'm just doing a session that doesn't have any automation to begin with on the regular volume line? Let me just get rid of all of my automation here, and I'll just we'll go back to square one here. If I do all of my moves on the trim lane, okay, so let's do all of my moves on the trim lane. Check this out. Okay, so again, you can see the fader moving, right? Let's make it a little more drastic. So it moves a little faster. So you can see all of that stuff moving, right? Well, I can also trim that freely at any time without having to change modes. And it's always there. It's a lot easier. This is something you're just going to have to play with. Do your automation in the trim, and you can have all your moves going, and then you can still make little trim moves, or you can rebalance, but keep all your automation intact very, very easily. And the nice thing about doing it this way is once you get it exactly the way you want, you can coalesce that into, it says here, coalesce trim automation. So you can then have that, push that off the trim It frees up the trim and then puts all of that onto the volume line. As far as I know, and like I said, things are changing all the time. As far as I know, there's no way to move this to the trim automation. Could be wrong on that. If I'm wrong on that, tell me. I would love that. You used to not be able to, and if they implemented it, that's awesome. But you can always move your volume trim moves to this lane to free up the volume trim, but you can't do the opposite. So this just gives you more flexibility. And I just, again, this is one of those things where I don't know a lot of other people who work in that trim mode, but I like to write all of my automation in trim and leave it there. I don't coalesce it until the very, very end, until I'm like, okay, mix is done, and then I'll coalesce it. Hopefully that answered your question a little bit. Cool. We have any more questions? I think I got the delay down a little better, but okay. Well, guess you guys got it all. I love it. Okay, well, if there are any more questions, put them in the comments. I'm going to try to get another video done next week if I can. I think what I would like to do is to take a session, and maybe I can get permission from somebody recently who's sent me a session and show you how I get that session into we're ready to rock and we're ready to mix. That might also be a good opportunity to show you how I like sessions to show up, or how I like to prep sessions for other people. Because ultimately, before I start importing my template, or before I start bringing their stuff into my template, I usually open up their session, I do a save as, and I change a few things. I might change track colors, I might change names of tracks like we talked about last time. Sometimes I leave the names the same, sometimes I change them. There's often things that I will do like a first round of cleanup, but we could probably talk about that while we're doing the kind of the formatting stuff, and I'll just work from a track top to bottom and show you guys literally fly on the wall. This is what it would be. So, yeah. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe. Follow me on my socials, all the Instagram and Facebook. I'm at Chris Baseford. And yeah, thanks for tuning in, guys. I know these videos are long-winded, and I love this format because we can do that. I wanted to be able to do something that is a little bit more in depth and has a little more explanation, so it's not just telling you what to do, and maybe giving you guys some insight as to why I do certain things. So thank you. I appreciate it. Share with your friends and invite more people to come, and I'll keep this going as long as you guys show up and find it useful. So thank you guys. I appreciate it. I'll wait on 2 more minutes in case there's any more questions, and then we'll jump to the comments, and I'll kind of get to those as I'm working through the weekend and next week. And yeah, if there's any dialogue, any other topics that you guys want me to cover, please let me know. So, okay. Love it, guys. Thank you so much. I appreciate you all, and have an amazing, amazing weekend. And we'll see you next time. Thanks, guys. Bye.